Welcome all, I'm so glad you're here. This is Jennifer McGuire. Today I'm taking 3 different types of products and showing 3 ways to use each. So I've got a bunch of cards to share, lots of tips and techniques. Now all of my cards today kind of have a fall theme to them. I'm kind of getting into that fall vibe, but keep in mind that you could use these tips and tricks with a variety of different themed products and different products that you may have on hand. And I also wanted to let you know that in this video, there is a product that when I used it, just blew my mind how well it worked. So I'm excited to share that with you. Now, I also wanted to mention that today's video is part of a video hop for Altenew, celebrating their new release. I was excited to do this video hop because I think it is a really beautiful release with lots of great products. There is information about the video hop and the ways to save and giveaways in my description below. Okay, let's get started with the first set of cards. Now these all use a product bundle in different ways. Really, I'm using the stencils as the main thing and then incorporating different products with them in different ways. So this is the new Altenew Pumpkin Patch collection. This is just the sweetest collection. Now all of these products are sold separately or together. You have a 6x8 stamp set, which has some great sentiments, the big ones and the small ones, and that fun pumpkin overview. Then you have layering stencils that can be used with that stamped image or on their own. Then there is an embossing folder that can be used with those layering stencils also. And then of course coordinating dies for those 3 large sentiments on the stamp set. So a lot of different ways you can mix and match with these. Today I'm really focusing on how great those stencils are, but I will show how to use them with the embossing folder and with the stamp set. I feel like bundles like this are becoming more and more popular, and so it's good to look at the many ways you can use them. I will say that the 3 cards I do with this collection have a very similar vibe to them, but you definitely could change up the colors to get a different look, but today I really wanted to use the same color palette on all of my cards. So I have the Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine here and a piece of white cardstock that I misted with a bit of water. I'm running this 3D embossing folder through my die cut machine, just following the manufacturer's instructions for using a 3D embossing folder. And I know a lot of people say embossing powders are magical when you melt them, but I think embossing folders are even better. I think it's beautiful what a simple folder can do to cardstock. Now I thought I'd show a way to step this up so that you have an inked background. This will be really fun because we'll have an inked background and then we'll ink up the pumpkin so the entire piece will be covered with color. I put a tiny bit of tape runner on the back of this cardstock piece so it's held in place, and then I'll run it through my die cut machine just like I demonstrated. And then when I'm done, you can see I've got that impression, but my cardstock is stuck there, which is what we want. We want it to stay there. On the other side of the folder, I am applying Altenew Fresh Dye Ink to the raised areas. And in this case, the raised areas on this side of the folder is the background. So I'm using frayed leaf. You can use a variety of inks here. I find pigment inks work great, but also these Altenew dye inks are wonderful. I'll close that up and run it through again, and this will press the ink into the background. Now I'm going to warn you, it doesn't look pretty when it first comes out. It looks very uneven and splotchy. Just keep going with it. Repeat the process. Again, you're only putting ink on the raised areas, not in the pumpkin area. You could use a brayer to do this if you're afraid of getting that ink in the pumpkins, but really I find it's not that big of a deal. All right, now you can clean off your embossing folder with no problem and let that background dry. When it dries, you'll have beautiful green color. So let me set that aside while it dries and let's do another one. This time I'm using a much lighter ink. I usually prefer lighter inks for this technique, but I wanted to show you both. This is the pistachio color. It's a great light ink. I did notice I got some ink into the pumpkin, so I just wipe it away with my finger. By the way, this is a technique you can do with any embossing folder, whether it's 2D or 3D, and I will link up here on the top right and at the end of this video to another video where I show more about this technique. All right, now I do recommend doing this process 2 or 3 times where you ink up the embossing folder, the side of the embossing folder, close it and run it through. Because the more ink you transfer, the better the inked background will be. And look how we have that soft green ink in the background. All we need to do is ink up those pumpkins. Now before I start doing the pumpkins on these embossed pieces that we've just created, I'm doing a dry run. Now this is something that I do off screen a lot when I get a new layering stencil set. I just don't often show it in the video. What I like to do is just grab a piece of white cardstock and quickly ink up the stencils. Now, Altenew does have a suggested coloring guide for their layering stencils that you could follow, but I wanted to do a dry run first on my own just so I could better understand the stencils and then get better results on my embossed pieces. So here you see me with the first stencil applying a bunch of orange over it, and then I will come in and add brown to the pumpkin tops, and then I'll move on to the next stencil. So I'm not doing much selective coloring here. I'll do a little bit on a couple of the next stencils, but really, again, this is just a dry run, a practice run, so I can kind of plan out how I want to ink this up on my actual card bases that I've done that embossing on. You'll notice under my left hand is a little corner, it looks like a corner of a stencil. That's called an Altenew alignment guide. I'm just moving that around so I can mask off that little pumpkin there in the center that I want to be green. I use those little alignment guides because they're quick to move around and allow me to just mask off areas quickly and move on to the next one. So those alignment guides are very handy. There's a few in the pack. This is the one I use the most. Now, I also wanted to mention I'm working on my Stampwheel 2.0. Altenew has had a Stampwheel for some time, and they have the newer version coming out in November. It is available for pre-order now. I have it linked below. It's bigger than the original Stampwheel, and the side comes off so you can put a full sheet of cardstock in there. Now, I'm not doing much with the Stampwheel today, just a little bit. I'm not going to talk much about it because I'm still getting to know it, and I like to have a lot of experience with the product before I talk about it. Here, all I'm doing is using the sticky mat that comes inside of the Stampwheel. If you have another sticky mat from Altenew or another company, you definitely could do that here. You just put your cardstock on it and then the stencil, and you can see it really holds it in place. So again, I'm just getting some practice with the Stampwheel, so that's why you see me using it. So I am experimenting with a few different colors here. I wanted some happy, soft fall colors, and that's the color palette I used throughout this video. So this here was like my test run. I did decide that I wanted to change what color some pumpkins are, but when I go to stencil my embossed backgrounds, I can refer to this, so I know what to ink where. I will turn this into a card later for sure, but it is also my test run. So then I took that as kind of a guide and I did the same layered stenciling but over my white embossed background. So on the left, you can see my white embossed background. I did the layering stencils on top of them. And on the right, you can see my test run. Now, I will say when you have embossing folders and stencils that go together, I recommend doing the embossing folder first, then line up the layering stencils. It works beautifully. So I really liked the coloring I did on that second panel. So I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other panel where we pressed the green ink into the background. So I've just put it down on my sticky mat and I'll follow that last example that I created. So if you get a layering stencil set and you feel a little overwhelmed by all the different color options, either check out the guide that they include in the packaging or do a practice run. I really feel like that's a great way to save on some frustration and get the results that you want. All right, so I'm going through and adding these inks. Again, I stuck with the same ink colors on all of these. I didn't change anything. And I did try to do uneven, quick inking. So I didn't spend much time getting perfect blending. You could, if you wanted more, the look of dimension on these, like wanted some highlights and some darker areas, but I just did quick inking and I love the results. I did end up going and inking this one with the frayed leaf in the background too, although I think it looks really cool as is with the white. So these are the three backgrounds I'll use on my cards. These are all done with the embossing folder and the stencils. And the two on the right, I added that green ink in the embossing folder. Now I do have some more techniques we're going to use with these backgrounds, but let's get started with the first card. This is a fun window trifold card that really is great with a lot of different backgrounds like this one. So I'm starting with a piece of cardstock that is 8.5 by 11 inches, and I'm scoring it right down the middle at 4 1/4. And then I will cut that in half at 5.5 inches. So I'll have two side folding note cards. I will use these two pieces together to create my trifold card. So I'll take one of them and turn it and then kind of interlock it with the other. So I'm just putting them together, and this will be my trifold card. This is a great universal design that you can do with a lot of products. So I like to write on each side what it is. This will be the front of the card. and this is where I'll have a window that shows to the inside. This is where I'll put my pumpkin background that will show through that window. And then I'll open it again, and this is where I will write my personal message. So nobody will see this until they open the card. And then this piece right here will be covered with glue. I'm just doing that because it really makes it helpful in putting it together. You don't have to write that all on there. That is definitely just for me to share in the video. Now, one thing I think is helpful is to cut a little bit, just a hair off this part here where the background will go, where it says pumpkins, and then cut off a little bit from the part that says messages. So this is where your personal message will go. This will help to make those two cards interlock better and give you a nice overall look. So, and when this is all glued together, it'll be 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So let's start with where it says pumpkin. I'll put our background on here. I'm using the background that had the light green ink pressed into the embossing folder, and I did trim that down to be 4 by 5 1/4 inches. Next up, let's do the front of our card. Notice how there is the window, but there's also the light green trim around the outside edge. So I have a piece of white cardstock that is 4 by 5 1/4 inches, just a little bit smaller than our note card itself. I'm taping at the center an oval die from Spellbinders. It's one of my favorite die sets, and that just gives us a window in the front of that panel. Now I'm holding that onto the front of our note card and popping the same die into that opening. I'll put some tape on it, open up the note card, and run it through my die cut machine. This will give us that oval window on the front of our card panel and the front of the card itself. Now this didn't cut completely through, so I'll pop it back in place, run it through my die cut machine again, and it definitely will cut through that time. Now, I wanted to add a little interest to that white frame there, that white panel that'll go in front. So I'm putting it into that same embossing folder, and I'm trying to position it so it's in the embossing folder at the same positioning as my pumpkin background. I'm running that through my die cut machine, and now I'll have that pumpkin embossing on the front of the card, which will line up with the pumpkins on the inside. Remember how I wanted a light green trim showing around the edge, but my note card is white? So I am just inking up the front of the card. I've placed my open card onto the sticky part of my stamp wheel, and then I put one of the large Altenew alignment guides. Remember I said there were 3 sizes? This is the bigger one. And I placed it to mask off the back of the card. So I only got green on the front. And only the outside edge will show so that you can see it's uneven, but no one will ever know. Applying ink to your cardstock is a great way to get a perfect match to the stamping or stenciling you've done on your card. So let's put our card bases together. Remember the X is where I put the glue, and I'll put those together, and then we can fold it all in. So looking at my card here, I did decide I also wanted to have a light green frame or trim around that window. You definitely could skip this, but it's not hard to do. I will take a oval die that is one bigger than the one we used to cut the window. I cut that from white cardstock, and around the outside edge, I'm applying that pistachio ink. Then I'll take the oval die that I used to create the window, which is slightly smaller, run that through the die cut machine, center it up, and there we have our fine little trim that can go around our window. I wasn't sure if I wanted a light green trim or if I wanted a gold trim. So I also did the same thing with gold cardstock, and I'm testing this out. I do this often where I'll create 2 things and decide which I want, but I'm going to save the gold one for later on. And here I decided to go with that light green. I put liquid adhesive around the window opening on the front of the card and laid the frame right onto it. Now let's get our pieces ready for the sentiment. I took 2 sentiments from the Pumpkin Patch stamp set, and I also chose the large Grateful die cut word from the Altenew Timeless Sentiments 3 dies. Over on the right are all the dies that are included in that set. It has all of those words and the shadow dies, and Grateful is my favorite. I just put glue behind the G and the L so that I could glue it stretched across that window. Then I stamped those little pumpkin patch sentiments with black ink on a white cardstock strip, and I'm gluing one of those right along the bottom of the Grateful shadow die cut, so it looks like it's floating there. I have the second sentiment from the Pumpkin Patch stamp set that I stamped on another piece of white cardstock, and I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back of that sentiment strip. I have my card open, and I'm laying this strip right along the back of the word Grateful. The adhesive is facing up towards the camera. I'm making sure that it is straight, and then I will close my card onto it. This will grab that sentiment strip and glue it onto the pumpkin background, but it's positioned perfectly so you don't see it when the card is closed because it's hidden behind the word grateful. So the sentiment continues on to the inside. Now, one thing you can do to add some interest to these stenciled backgrounds is add a little bit of shading with markers. I'm just putting a little bit of darker brown at the base of the stems. That's all I did, but you definitely could add so much detail to these backgrounds. I wanted to keep it pretty simple. Now, another thing you can do with that embossing folder is to use it on the flap of your envelope. So I have an Altenew envelope here. I love the colors that they have. I'm putting the flap into the pumpkin embossing folder, running that through just like I would if I was using cardstock. And now we have an envelope that matches our card. So here's a look at the completed card. I kept it pretty clean. I didn't add details to it. I didn't add any gems. But look at that texture and color you get by doing that trick where we pressed that green ink into the background. So we took that white cardstock, made it completely colored, and gave it textured. And I think that's so much fun. And remember this window card design because this is a great way to really highlight a background that you create in any different way. Here I did stenciling and embossing folders. All right, let's move on to our second way to use these products. This time I'm doing a floating shaker window, which is so cool to do. Love the results of it. For this, you'll need a piece of heat-resistant acetate, and I'm placing that into my stamp wheel. It's kind of hard to see, but it is there. I will use anti-static powder tool on it, and I'm pretty generous when I use powder on acetate because the powder will really want to stick to it. I'm lining up the pumpkin patch image from this coordinating stamp set, and I will stamp this with clear embossing ink. I'm using Versamark ink, but you could use whatever ink you may have. By the way, if you don't have a stamp wheel, you definitely could do this stamping with any stamp positioner such as a MISTI. I just like to show the good options that are out there. So once I've stamped this, I'll add gold glitter embossing powder. And I'll tell you, when you add embossing powder to a piece of acetate, it wants to stick everywhere. But I find if you flick it really hard from the back side, once you put the powder on, it'll knock a lot of that excess off and you'll end up with crisp embossing images. So just heat set that, make sure you move that heat around so it doesn't do any warping, and look at that beautiful result. And this lines up with one of our embossed and inked or embossed and stenciled backgrounds. So we'll use that to create a shaker window. I created a white cardstock panel that is 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I cut an oval from the center, much like we did on the last example. I'm placing that over our acetate that has the gold embossing, and I'll trim off the excess. So this will be the front window of our shaker. I'll take that window and line up that gold outline with the embossed pumpkins that are behind it. So you can see through it and line up the gold outline with our inked and embossed pumpkins. You'll hold those together and then trim off the excess. So now when you look through that window, your outline lines up with those inked pumpkins. I flipped over that frame and I'm putting adhesive all around the outside edge. I'm using Altenew foam tape, and you can see I've really made sure to close it in because we're adding shaker bits. Now at the center of our embossed background, I'm adding Altenew satin gold sequins. I really like these because they have a kind of a vintage look to them. I put quite a few in. You could use a lot less if you wanted to. Now I'll remove the release paper from all that foam tape, and I'll take our window and place it down over the background, making sure that the outline lines up with those embossed and inked pumpkins behind. I then will put glue on the back of that and place it onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. I wanted a bold but simple sentiment, so I'm using the new Altenew Orchids bundle. There is a stamp set, there is a die set, and there are coordinating stencils. Look how beautiful those images are, but I'm only using the thank you sentiment and coordinating die for this card. But I definitely need to come back and use those stamps because those orchids are gorgeous. And the last step for this card is I stamped on the envelope flap. So I have an envelope open here and I placed it into my stamp wheel on the sticky mat, and I put one of the alignment guides to mask the front of the envelope, and I'm stamping the pumpkin patch on the flap only. I just feel like this is a great way to tie your envelope and card together. That's something unique that you normally can't buy in a store, and it makes our cards extra special. So you can see how handy it is to have something to mask off areas, and these alignment guides just work really well for it. All right, so now let's look at the completed card. We have our envelope and our sentiment. I did take that gold frame that I showed you earlier, the gold oval frame, and I glued that around the shaker window opening, and I added the thank you sentiment. So here you can see why I call it a floating shaker window, because that outline gold embossing looks like it's floating above our pumpkins underneath it. And it all lines up beautifully, and it makes for a really, really special card. So if you have stamps that coordinate with stencils or stamps that coordinate with an embossing folder, you can try this technique to create a floating window or floating shaker card. All right, now remember at the beginning of the video, I said there was a product that I used that blew my mind on how great the results were. Well, we're at that point. Now this is a press plate. Now press plates can be used in 3 different ways. You can use them with the Better Press system. You can use them with the Glimmer Foil system, which I'm going to demonstrate later. And you can use them to make an impression if you don't have the Better Press or Glimmer machine. I'm not going to demonstrate the making an impression here, but I will link to it up here on the top right and at the end of this video that shows a video all about that. So this is the Altenew One Go Solid Sentiment Strips. There's a press plate and a coordinating die, and it is unbelievable, which you'll see in a moment. I'm putting it onto my Better Press system right at the center of the gray platform, and I'm taping a piece of white cotton cardstock to the clear plate. I am inking up the press plate with Altenew Obsidian Black pigment ink, but I find a lot of different inks work for this. Once I know that it's inked, I will put the clear plate on top with the paper facing down. I'll take this and run it through my Spellbinders die cut machine, which presses it together. And wait till you see this. Look at these results. That's one pass through, not a flaw in any of those sentiments. It is mind-blowing how you can get such great crisp results with a Better Press. It's unbelievable. I couldn't get this with a stamp. It just never would be this crisp. So this is what I was so excited about. And later you'll see it foils beautifully also. By the way, I mentioned I used cotton cardstock from Spellbinders for this, but you could use any cardstock you have. And then there is the die that goes with it that cuts them all out beautifully. I'm so excited about this. Now I have all of these sentiments ready to go, and I'm really hoping Altenew comes out with more that work with this die. Now that we have our sentiments, let's create our card base. Now this is a fun kind of gatefold card opening. And to do this, you need 2 pieces of white cardstock that are 8.5 by 5.5 inches. I'm doing 2 score lines, one at 2 1/8 of an inch, which is just one groove line to the right of the 2-inch mark. Then I'll do another score line at 4 1/4. And I'll do the same thing to the other piece, 2 1/8 of an inch and 4 1/4. Then we will accordion fold on these so you end up with what looks kind of like a Z fold. You'll need these 2 pieces because, like our first card, they'll interlock together to create this fun fold. So you have these 2 pieces that look exactly the same. You're going to rotate one over, put them together, and you have another type of fun fold. I'll put adhesive along this back panel on one of them and take the other back panel and put it right onto the adhesive, and look at that. You have a fun gatefold card. So I'll take my last of the pumpkin backgrounds. This is the one where we use the darker frayed leaf green in the embossing folder. I trim that background down to be 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm cutting it in half at 2 inches. I will glue 1/2 to the left flap, 1/2 to the right flap, and it leaves a white trim around the outside. And now we have another card design that could be used with any kind of background. Any background you want to showcase would work for this. On this card, I'm using 3 sentiment strips that I created earlier. I want them to be strong, so I use that coordinating die to cut additional cardstock strips using just some scrap paper. I'm gluing 2 additional die cuts behind our black sentiment so that it's nice and strong. And then I used a black pen around the edge to turn the white edges black. It just gives it a nice, fun touch. Gives it a kind of finished look, but you don't have to do that. I want to add my 3 sentiment strips centered at the center of the card. So here's a trick that I really like to do. I have the Holtz Ruler. This is an incredible tool if you work on a glass work surface. It grips to it. There's grips on the back that hold it in place. I'm putting it right up to the side of my card, and I've got my card kind of centered on some of the tick marks. And I know because of how I have it positioned that the 6-inch mark is the center of my card. And I promise I'll demonstrate better with this ruler in the future, but here I was using it to find out where my middle sentiment should go. And I'm also using a T-ruler to make sure it's straight. Now, that sentiment in the middle, I only put liquid adhesive on the back left of, and I'm placing the two other sentiments above and below that, and I only put adhesive on the back right. So the top and the bottom sentiment are glued to the right flap, and the middle one's only glued to the left flap, so they open differently, which I think is fun. I created a small note card that is top folding 3.5 inches by 4 3/4 inches, and I stamped a sentiment on it from the Orchid stamp set I showed you earlier. So here is the completed card. You can see when you open it, the sentiments go in different directions but interlock to meet there at the center. We have our beautiful background that we created with the ink, stenciling, and embossing folder. And when you open it up, there's a mini note card on the inside that you open up to see your personal message. And of course, I have a matching envelope where I use the embossing folder on the flap. So this is yet another design that you can do with large backgrounds and keep it in focus, but also offer something a little more interesting. Fun folds are always good for that. So far, I've taken a product bundle and shown you 3 different ways to use it, specifically those stenciled and embossing folder backgrounds. And these all 3 are designs that work well with product bundles or are just fun folds that you can create with other products. All right, now let's move on to my next set of cards. I have 2 cards that have these cute little pumpkins, but what I really want to show you are the backgrounds. But let's create those pumpkins first. I'm using the Altenew Pretty Pumpkins layering die set. As with all layering die sets from Altenew, there is a guide that shows you how to layer them, but they're really easy to figure out. So it creates 3 different size pumpkins. So I have 3 containers. These are Spellbinders craft stacks over there on the right. That helps me to organize things as I'm creating. So I'm using colors of cardstock that match the inks I used before because I really like that color combination, and it saved time in me trying to figure out another color combination. I just used the same one again. So I did all of my die cutting using the containers to help me sort things out. And you can see up there on the top left, I have the guide from Altenew, so I know how to put them together. I just use a little pickup stick tool. This one is from Altenew. I like it because the pokey end isn't super sharp, but it's sharp enough to poke dies out of, or die cuts out of the dies. It's just really handy. But any kind of tool like this is helpful in picking up the small die cuts and placing them where you need them. So I created 2 of each pumpkin, so I have 6 in total, and I'll use 3 on one card, 3 on the other card. Now that I have those ready, let's do our backgrounds. This is the next product that I'm going to show how to use in 3 different ways. So this is the new Altenew Zero Waste Autumn Leaves die. I love their zero waste dies. It's a wonderful way to create a cool background, but also to make a bunch of little die cuts very quickly. The first way I'll use this die is to make an impression. I'm taking a light brown, this is Sand Dunes ink, and gently rubbing it over the raised cutting edge of the die. I will place that down onto a piece of white cardstock and run it through my die cut machine using the sandwich to make an impression or emboss with a die. It involves using a flexible mat. Most machines come with one, and you can then use dies to make an impression like this one instead of cutting. And because I applied that light ink to the raised cutting edge, it also leaves a little bit of ink into those pressed in areas, which defines the pattern even more. Now I'm doing this again. I'm not using this background today, but I wanted to demonstrate it. This time I used a slightly darker brown ink, and I'm putting it onto brown paper. And that flexible mat there is there underneath that cardstock. I'll run it through my die cut machine and look at that beautiful impression we get. It looks like faux leather. It's so cool. Now the first background we made on white, I'll use that on a card, but I also wanted to show you a faux inlay technique that starts with the process I just showed you. So this time I have a piece of ivory colored cardstock. This is Spellbinders Alabaster. It's a great ivory. And I am repeating the process here, pressing that light brown ink in and leaving that gorgeous impression. Now we could use this as is, however, I'm going to do another step to it to give that faux inlay look, which doesn't take much time at all. I have a piece of double-sided adhesive from Altenew, and I'm putting it on the back of a piece of white cardstock. So basically we created our own sticker paper. I'm using the zero waste leaf die and cutting from the front of this cardstock. I run it through my die cut machine twice to make sure it really cuts well. After I do that, you can pop out all of the little leaves. And remember, all of these leaves now have adhesive on the back, so they're like little leaf stickers. Lots of them are created with this die, and you can see there's little impressions on them. They're gorgeous. Now, I'm not using those leaves today. I can save them for another project. That's the cool thing about the zero waste style die. Altenew has many of them, and I've used them many times in the past, and I love them so much. We have all these gorgeous leaves, but what I'm actually using is the negative space. I'm not letting that go to waste. For this technique, we'll take the release paper off of the back of that negative space and lay it on top of that ivory impression we just made, lining up the openings of the leaves with the leaf impressions behind it. I'm sorry my head gets in the way, but you got to really look over it to line it up. And the nice thing about the Altenew double-sided adhesive is it gives you some time to move it. If you don't line it up just right, it holds really well once you press it down. So once I have it in the position I want, I'll press it down by putting the release paper back on top and rubbing over it with my bone folder. The reason I use that release paper is when I press this down, I don't want to leave any marks on my background and I don't want to catch any loose edges. So look at that. You can look through it and see the details that we made with that impression. However, to make this look more like you inlaid each of those little die cuts, we're going to do another thing. We're going to run this through our die cut machine just to squeeze it together. So I'm using the same sandwich I did to make an impression with the die. I'm just putting my layered cardstock on it and running it through. This will flatten it and make those leaves kind of push up into the openings so it looks more like an inlay. However, you can make this look even better by repeating the process and lining the die up before you run it through. This will put that texture back into the leaves, and look at how it looks like you popped in each of those ivory die cuts, but really you used the trick that I shared here. It gives a great faux inlay look, and I love the results. So we have two backgrounds ready. Let's get the sentiments. I'm using the Altenew Morning Glory for the Thankful for You sentiment in the coordinating die. I've used this one many times in videos. I really like the sentiments. The other sentiment I'm using is Warm Hugs. I used the Pumpkin Patch stamp set from early on to create this one. So I glued all of the elements together, and here are our completed cards. Here's the first one where we made the impression with the die, and we had a little brown ink on the die, so it left that behind too. Very simple background with lots of texture. I added it to a card base along with the pumpkins, the Warm Hug sentiment, a little jute bow behind it, and some gold gemstones. By the way, for the sentiments on these, I used a dark brown ink. This is espresso ink from Altenew. I'm really loving using dark colored inks instead of black all the time. It just really worked well with this color palette, and it doesn't look as harsh. So don't be afraid to use a colored ink for sentiments, a dark color, instead of black. Now for the second card, I'm using the background where we did the faux inlay, and then I added all of the other elements on top. I really like the look of this, and it doesn't take very long to do. It works great with a lot of background dies, but especially the zero waste dies from Altenew. So I've shared two different ways to use this background die. Let's share the third way, and this is with die cut inlay, but I have some tricks for you. I want to make 4 cards using the same color palette from before because I like it so much. All of these pieces are cut to be slightly smaller than 4 by 5.5 inches. I'm putting the die at the center and cutting them out and keeping all the little die cuts in the background and putting them into my craft stacks containers to keep them organized. So I have a couple shades of orange, 3 shades of peach, and 3 shades of green. I then go through and pop out all of the little pieces. So look at all of these die cuts that we have. And we have those negative spaces. And I'll do this for all of our panels. I love how these zero waste backgrounds give you the outline and the little pieces, so nothing goes to waste. I chose 4 of the negative space pieces to use now. I'll save the others for later. I also have white note cards that are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I have cut a piece of double-sided adhesive that is slightly smaller. I place that onto the front of our note card. Then I'll take one of the negative space pieces and lay it right on that. So now all of those leaf openings have exposed adhesive, which will make it easier to inlay our little leaves. Now you'll notice there are some big leaves and some small leaves here. You could just inlay the bigger ones and skip the smaller ones. I'll show you what you can do with those smaller openings instead. But I really like to inlay these pieces. I find it very therapeutic. I find it like putting puzzles together. But if you don't enjoy inlaying die cut pieces, do the trick I showed you on the last card. So I'm just mixing and matching here, putting different colors in. You can see how it fits right into the openings and it pops into that adhesive behind it. Now this adhesive, as I mentioned, holds tight once you press it down, so you do have some time to move things to get it just right. I filled in all of the leaf openings. You could skip some of the smaller ones if you wanted to and just do inlay for the larger ones. But I inlayed all of the leaves, but I left those little dots. See all the dots in the background? I left those open. I didn't want to have to inlay those little dots. So everything is inlaid except the dots. I put my release paper on top and I press down to make sure all of those leaves capture onto the adhesive behind it. But those dots are still exposed adhesive. So I'm taking some glitter. This is Hero Art's Earth Safe glitter. And I am putting that over our card, and that exposed adhesive in the dot openings grabs that glitter. We'll press that glitter into the adhesive, and now we have glitter in those little openings. I love the look of it, and it's a nice trick when you don't want to do inlay on the tiny little areas. So I did that with all 4 of the backgrounds, so I have 4 note cards ready to add sentiments. On this one, I wanted to show you 2 more ways to use that press plate I showed you earlier. Earlier we used it with the Better Press. Here I'm using it with foil. So this will be 3 ways to use this press plate. So I have my Spellbinders Glimmer foil machine. I have it warmed up. I have the press plate laying on it. I'm taking some gold matte foil, laying it face down onto the press plate, putting cardstock onto it, and then putting the plates on top that come with the Glimmer machine. You can see I accidentally foiled my plate and I cleaned it off the best I could. I do put a cardstock shim in there. It just seems to work better with my Glimmer machine. I let the timer run on that, and then I run it through my die cut machine to apply the pressure. So between heat and pressure, we'll get a beautiful foiled image. I have found that press plates foil even better than foil plates. And look at this gorgeous result. So earlier we had the black, crisp results. Here we have this gold shine. I love it. Now here's the third way to use this press plate. Take a solid hot foil plate, this one is from Pink Fresh, and lay your negative foil face down on it. Then you put white cardstock on top and your 2 plates that the Glimmer comes with, along with a cardstock shim. Run the timer on that to get it hot, then run it through your die cut machine for the pressure. And this will give you the reverse of the foiled image that you got before. So there's no leftover foil going to waste. And here you can see how we have the positive and the negative sentiments, both in the gold foil. I can then use the One Go die that coordinates with it to cut all of these out. And so we'll end up with white sentiment strips with gold letters, and then gold sentiment strips with white letters. I chose 5 to add to this card base, and I'm again using that Tim Holtz ruler that has grips on the back that works on a glass work surface to hold my card in place and also find my center point. So I chose the center sentiment to put down first. I put liquid adhesive on the back of it. I'm using my T ruler to make sure it's straight, and I know that one is centered. Now the rest of them, I'll just try to evenly space, I eyeball it, above and below that middle one. So I was able to use 5 foiled sentiments on this first card. This one is definitely my favorite of the bunch, but I created 4 cards in total. On the other cards, I just added a die cut sentiment. So on this one, I used that Grateful that I used earlier from the Timeless Sentiments 3 set. I used the darker green and white cardstock for that. I didn't add anything else to these because I wanted that inlay background to show. On this one, I did gold for the Grateful. And on the third one, I used the older Timeless Sentiments 1. This is one of those die sets that I reach for a lot, and I've shared a lot in my videos. I think they're great basic sentiments that work on a lot of different card styles. And then, of course, we have our 4th card that we created using the foiling and press plate. So there you have 3 different ways to use that background die and 3 different ways to use those press plates. Now I do have a bonus card for you before I leave. This one I just did for fun. I've been wanting to use it and I thought I'd add it in here. It's another example of using a press plate, but a lot of people have been asking about press plates with registrations. This is a new thing that folks are doing with their Spellbinders Better Press, and I wanted to demonstrate how easy it is to do. So this is the Altenew Regal Wreath registration press plate. It comes with all the press plates you see here and this clear piece that has printing on it. You can see there are 4 sentiments included. I didn't use those today. You'll take the clear registration piece and tape it right into the center of your Better Press. If you've never used a Better Press system, I will link to a video all about it up here on the top right. I'm also taking a piece of cotton paper and taping it to the clear plate. I'm starting with the wreath, and I'm placing the wreath into the outline that is on that registration clear piece. So it fits right in there, so I know to get the placement just right. I'm inking that with Mountain Pine ink from Altenew. I'll place the clear plate with the paper face down on top, run it through my die cut machine, and it presses it together. So now I have this outline of the wreath in just the right spot. So I can remove that press plate and move on to the next press plate. And this fits in the blue outline on that clear registration piece or that clear registration guide. I'll ink this up with Just Green ink, and that's one of the Altenew colors. It's called Just Green. And then I will put my clear plate on top. That white paper is still in the same position. So this will end up putting green ink inside the holly leaves on our background. So by using that clear registration guide that comes with the product, look at the placement I was able to get. So cool. So I'll take that die or that press plate and move it to the next spot where there's a blue outline. Ink that up, put the plate on top, run it through, and now the rest of the green leaves are filled in. Then I'll take the flower press plate, line it up with the outline on the registration guide. I believe the outline is red for this. Ink it up with Coralberry ink, run it through, and then move it to the second position and do the same thing. And look at this wreath. Such detail to it. Flawless ink transfer, and it leaves a bit of an impression. Now to add some fun to this, I used a gold gel pen to make some of the dots gold, and I will add it to a gold note card. So I have a piece of gold cardstock here that I'm folding in half at 5.5 inches. Then I'll cut it in half at 4.25, and this will be my card base. I'll glue my white background down onto it. I did trim the white background down a little bit to be about 5.25 by 4 inches. And then I used the Thinking of You foiled sentiment that we created earlier. I did add gold gemstones to the center of the little flowers, but really this card didn't take much time to do. And the Better Press system really is a foolproof system. It works so very well. And look at that detailed result you get with a bit of an impression. All right, so that's just a bonus card. I thought it was fun, and I think I'm going to make more of those and maybe make some in non-holiday colors. So that's it today, all about stretching our supplies. If you're interested in the things that I used or that video hop, it's all in my YouTube description below. I also included some ways to save and a free gift. At the end here, I'll link to the other videos that I promised to share. I thank you for spending this time with me. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again very soon.